The Bondi terror attack has sent shockwaves around the world, with vigils held in places like the US and UK, countries that are also grappling with a rise in anti-Semitism. Pamela Nadell is the director of the Jewish Studies at the American University and author of Anti-Semitism, an American Tradition. She joins me now from Washington. Pamela, good to have you with us and appreciate your time this morning where you are. Firstly, I do want to get your impressions, your first impressions of what you saw, this terror attack that unfolded at Bondi Beach on Sunday.
My first impressions were, of course, horror and then, unfortunately, not surprise, because we have seen murderous attacks on Jews, even in Washington, D.C. last May, when a young couple leaving the Capitol Jewish Museum in Washington was gunned down by somebody who shouted that he did it for Palestine.
So many here, particularly from the Jewish community, say that the signs were there that something like this was going to happen. There were attacks on synagogues, others were vandalized, burnt. What does your research tell us about the warning signs when it concerns anti-Semitism and targets against Jewish communities?
What my research shows is that, as I said, I was not surprised. I was horrified, but not surprised, because certainly since October 7th, 2023, in Australia, there have been terrible signs of violent attacks on Jewish communities, such as firebombing of synagogue and of a Jewish school, and the protesters just 2 days after the horrors of October 7th, the terrorist attack in Israel, were marching in front of the Sydney Opera House. And they were saying, you know, where are the Jews? And some people said they were also saying, gas the Jews. Whether they said that or not, it really doesn't matter, because they were looking to make Jews afraid and send them a warning signal.
I do want to bring in a piece of research I read on the conversation that distinguishes between old and new Semitism, old being targeting of Jews as Jews, but new shifting the focus to Israel, blaming Jewish communities for Israel's actions in the war in Gaza. So in that vein, Pamela, have things changed since the war in Gaza began?
The answer is yes, in terms of the extent, but also no in terms of the very long history of anti-Zionist and anti-Israel hate that dates well back into the 20th century, that the Soviets helped to launch, and of course Islamist anti-Semitic hate. And what you're doing, which is really smart, is you're distinguishing between, I would say, or among different forms of anti-Semitism. So we have classical Christian anti-Judaism, that the Jews are blamed for the death of Jesus. It morphs in the 19th century into racial anti-Semitism. The Jews are an evil race. And now we see it as an attack on Israel.
Yes, and so in that vein, has the ideology of anti-Semitism changed in the more recent years, and how is it manifesting itself?
It's changed in more recent years because of the breadth of the opposition. If we would go back to the UN conference in Durban in September of 2001, we would have seen the same ideas being spouted out about the illegitimacy of Israel and the calls to end the Jewish state. What we're seeing now is and what we've seen since October 7th is an enormous explosion everywhere that even reached to Australia, which has a very, very small Jewish community.
And Pamela, can you give us a sense of the degree of anti-Semitism where you are in the US?
In terms of the United States, we are seeing, and I think very much what you're also seeing in Australia, is we're seeing anti-Semitism rising, and it's been rising in the US, both from the right and from the left. And this is part of a worldwide phenomenon. And the fact that that Australia established an office to combat and monitor anti-Semitism. Gillian Siegel, I hope I pronounced that right. Gillian Siegel was appointed to that position, I believe maybe in 2024, as a reflection of this, and that most nations that have Jewish communities have been dealing with this problem since post 2023, and they have been establishing these positions, and they have also developed global guidelines to combat anti-Semitism.
And has that in any way been successful in the US?
In terms of the US, I would say that there's successes and there's failures. And I also, my understanding is this is the same problem in Australia, and that is that one of the bastions of anti-Semitism coming from the left is located both in universities and in cultural spaces. And in the United States, after the encampments in the spring of 2024, protesting the Gaza war, the universities managed to calm down the campuses in terms of the extent of the disruptions. The academic year after that saw encampments reduced by 94% in the US. But where anti-Semitism has not been reduced, both in the cultural spaces and in the universities, and frankly everywhere, is on social media. Social media is the chief progenitor of anti-Semitism, not only in Australia and the US, but around the world.
If you had the most important solution to combat anti-Semitism in the manner it manifests itself at this point of time, what would that be?
What I would be looking for would be both vertical and horizontal alliances. So vertical alliances, obviously, with the state governments and the federal government, and enforcement across all of the mechanisms and institutions that the government has to clamp down on it. But we also need horizontal alignments. We need relations with interfaith leaders. We need relations at the grassroots level. We need to build bridges to allies, because this is a problem that's bubbling up from the bottom up, and just getting government enforcement is not going to solve it.
Okay, Pamela and Adele, we really appreciate you sharing your thoughts with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.